What happens when the line between Halloween fun and genuine terror blurs beyond recognition? When the manufactured scares of the season are replaced by a threat that is chillingly, undeniably real. Welcome, everyone, to a special Halloween edition of our True Crime Deep Dive. To all of you joining me from across the globe, whether you're watching from a bustling city, a quiet town, or anywhere in between, I want you to feel the atmosphere of this seemingly peaceful scene. Because tonight, we're exploring not one, but three separate, first-hand accounts of Halloween nights that went horribly wrong. Each story is a stark reminder that sometimes, the most dangerous monsters don't wear masks. They hide behind them. So settle in, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Your city, your country. Let's see how far this community of truth seekers stretches. Our first story comes from a young man we'll call Alex. It was Halloween night, just 2 years ago. Alex, then 22, worked as a community coordinator, and his day had been a marathon of festive chaos, costume contests, trivia games, and an epic kids versus parents dodgeball showdown. While rewarding, the day left him utterly drained. By the time he collapsed onto his couch at home, the only thing he wanted to face was the inside of his eyelids. But family duty called. His 15-year-old sister, whom we'll call Chloe, was desperate to take her 11-year-old nephew, let's call him Leo, trick-or-treating. The usual parental chaperones had bowed out, and the mantle of cool, responsible uncle fell squarely on Alex's weary shoulders. Reluctantly, he swapped his comfortable clothes for a jacket and drove to his parents' house. He found Chloe putting the finishing touches on a stunning Raven costume from Teen Titans, complete with pale, ghostly makeup. Leo was already geared up as Sub-Zero from Mortal Kombat, practicing his freeze attacks on an unsuspecting lamp. The scene was wholesome. A perfect slice of Halloween tradition. Alex herded them into the car and headed for a neighborhood renowned for its generous candy handouts. The night began perfectly. The air was filled with laughter and the rustle of candy bags growing heavier. Homeowners were friendly, one even eschewing candy for something more substantial. Alex still remembers the older gentleman at one house, manning a grill and handing out hot dogs and sodas. Protein is better for growing bodies than all that sugar, the man had said with a warm smile. It was a moment of pure, small-town decency. After hitting what felt like every lit porch on the street, their candy bags bulging, Alex decided it was time to call it a night. They began the 10-minute walk back to the car, the vibrant energy of the main strip fading behind them. The side streets were quieter now, the crowds thinning, the darkness between street lamps feeling a little deeper. It was in one of these pockets of shadow that Alex's instincts, honed by a constant awareness of his surroundings, kicked in. His eyes were drawn across the street to a yard where the porch light was conspicuously off. There, standing perfectly still amidst the shadows, was a figure. Head to toe in black, it wore a hooded cloak that obscured its form and a mask that completely erased its face. It was less a person and more a silhouette, a human-shaped void in the night. And it seemed to be facing them. A cold knot tightened in Alex's stomach. In a low, calm voice, he instructed Chloe and Leo, "Stay close to me. There's someone across the street. Look, but don't stare." He wanted them to be aware without escalating the situation. Leo, still riding a sugar high, chuckled, thinking it was just an elaborate prankster. But Chloe, who knew her brother carried a concealed Glock for protection, immediately understood the gravity in his tone. Her face paled beneath the white makeup. As they quickened their pace, Alex glanced back. The figure hadn't moved. But a moment later, the silence of the night was broken by a new sound, the deliberate, heavy crunch of booted footsteps on concrete, matching their pace from behind. Alex turned again. It was the same figure, but now closer, the details horrifyingly clear. This was no casual Halloween costume. Beneath the cloak, the person wore a tactical vest, black cargo pants, and military-style boots. The face was covered by a tight, full-head spandex mask. This was not a prank, this was a uniform. This was a threat. "Listen to me very carefully," Alex whispered, his voice tight. "Do not stop walking. Do not look back. The person I pointed out is behind us. We don't want to alarm them. Just keep moving." He locked eyes with Leo, impressing the seriousness upon the young boy. The footsteps followed them all the way to the car, a relentless, stalking presence. As they reached the vehicle, the figure was still advancing. This was no longer a passive observation, it was a pursuit. In that moment, every instinct screamed at Alex that they were in imminent danger. He made a split-second decision. He told the kids to get in the car, and as they scrambled inside, he turned, drew his weapon, and aimed it at the approaching figure. "Why the hell are you following us?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the tense silence. The figure froze, hands rising in a gesture of surprise. Then, slowly, deliberately, the gloved hands reached up and pulled off the spandex mask. Revealed underneath was the face of a woman in her 30s. Her expression was unnervingly blank. She didn't answer his question. "I said, why are you following us?" Alex repeated, the gun still leveled. What she said next was a jumble of logic that made no sense. In a flat, almost robotic tone, she claimed, "I'm an undercover officer. We had a report of a break-in at that residence. When you looked at me with such suspicion, I assumed you were the perpetrator. I suggest you lower your weapon, or I'll have you arrested for threatening a law enforcement officer." Alex's mind raced. A break-in? Why would she be standing in the yard, facing away from the house? Why the theatrical, tactical get-up? Why would a burglar be casually walking away with two kids in costume? The story was a flimsy house of cards. But the badge, if she had one, carried weight. Hesitantly, he lowered the gun. "If you're undercover," he pressed, "why the tactical gear? And what's with the cloak? That doesn't exactly scream blend in." She didn't answer. Instead, her blank stare transformed. A malicious glint entered her eyes, and her lips curled into a slow, deeply unsettling smile. It was a smile that didn't convey humor, but a promise. "You know," she said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper, "if you didn't have that gun, this night would have ended a hell of a lot different for you." As the last word left her mouth, Alex's peripheral vision caught movement. From the gaps between the houses, 4 more figures emerged. They were dressed in identical tactical gear, their faces also masked. They moved with a coordinated, silent purpose, forming a loose semicircle. Their expressions were utterly vacant, as if all humanity had been drained from them. Alex didn't wait another second. He yelled at the kids to lock the doors, kept his eyes on the group for a terrifying moment longer, then slid into the driver's seat, slammed the car into gear, and sped away. In the rearview mirror, he saw the smiling woman standing her ground, while her blank-faced companions watched them flee. The ride home was shrouded in a heavy, shocked silence. The joyful energy of the night had been completely vacuumed out, replaced by a cold, lingering fear. Alex dropped off his traumatized sister and nephew, ensuring they were safely inside before driving home himself, his hands still trembling on the wheel. The questions were torturous. Why them? In a neighborhood teeming with potential targets. Why had this organized group singled out his family? The woman's final threat echoed in his mind. This felt planned. The horror wasn't over. A few days later, a single, wordless text arrived from an unknown number. It was a photograph, crystal clear and menacing, a picture of his car, taken in the parking lot of his own apartment complex. They knew where he lived. He filed a police report, but without a direct, explicit threat, the authorities' hands were tied. Driven by a need for answers, Alex later returned to the house where he'd first seen the woman. The homeowner, a confused man in his 40s, confirmed there had been no break-in. He'd been asleep early for work and had heard nothing. The undercover cop's story was a complete fabrication. The conclusion was inescapable. This was not a random encounter. He and his family had been deliberately targeted by a group whose motives remain a mystery. The tactical gear, the coordinated approach, the subsequent stalking, it all pointed to a level of intent that is deeply disturbing. Alex sought therapy to manage the resulting paranoia and installed a security system. While no further contact occurred, the psychological scars of that night run deep. The cheerful holiday was forever stained by the memory of that malicious smile, and the chilling promise that his preparedness was the only thing that stood between his family and an unthinkable fate. Our second story takes us out of the suburbs and into the woods, to a place where family fun was meant to be the only item on the agenda. For a young boy we'll call Sam, then 12 years old, the promise of a Halloween weekend away from his normal neighborhood routine was the pinnacle of excitement. The Whispering Pines Resort was the kind of place that seemed plucked from a nostalgic postcard. It wasn't luxurious, but it was authentic, a cluster of rustic, A-frame cabins nestled around a central lodge with a massive stone fireplace, a small, placid lake perfect for canoeing, and long, open fields that gave way to a dense, seemingly endless expanse of northern forest. During the day, it was idyllic. The air was crisp and carried the invigorating scent of pine needles and wood smoke. The festive aroma of candied apples and roasting hot dogs from the lodge weaved through the laughter of children already in their costumes, even though dusk was hours away. Sam, buzzing with anticipation, quickly befriended another boy his age staying in the adjacent cabin, a kid named Ryan who was decked out in a glow-in-the-dark skeleton costume. They became instant allies in the pursuit of fun and candy, spending the afternoon immersed in classic Halloween games, a ring toss where the bottles were shaped like ghosts, a pumpkin carving contest, and a three-legged race where parents and kids tangled themselves in shared laughter. But as the sun began its slow descent, dipping below the tree line and painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the atmosphere began to undergo a subtle, sinister shift. The friendly woods that had provided a beautiful backdrop by day now seemed to draw closer, their depths thickening into a wall of impenetrable blackness. The cheerful, well-lit paths between cabins now felt like narrow corridors between realms of unknown shadow. The resort's main event was a highly anticipated haunted hayride. As full darkness embraced the resort, a tired-looking tractor hitched to a long wagon lined with hay bales awaited its passengers. The mood was electric. Families bundled in jackets and blankets piled onto the wagon, their breath misting in the chill air. The driver, a resort employee, wore a ragged scarecrow mask that was more charming than frightening. The tractor's engine coughed to life, and they lurched forward, leaving the warm, golden glow of the lodge behind and venturing into the tunnel of darkness that was the wooded trail. The ride started out exactly as promised, fun and safely scary. The path was lined with flickering torches that cast dancing, monstrous shadows. Every few minutes, a staff member in a zombie costume or a sheet ghost would leap from behind a tree with a theatrical groan, eliciting shrieks of delighted fear from the children and good-natured jumps from the adults. It was all a performance, a dance on the edge of fear where everyone knew the steps. But about halfway through the ride, the performance ended, and something real began. The tractor entered a particularly dense and quiet stretch of the trail, where the torches were spaced farther apart and the canopy of pine trees blotted out the moonlight. The laughter on the wagon died down, replaced by a respectful hush. It was in this pocket of near silence, broken only by the chugging of the tractor, that Sam's eyes were drawn to the tree line on his left. There, just beyond the reach of the flickering torchlight, standing so still he seemed like a statue, was a man. He wasn't in a costume. There were no fake wounds, no mask, no attempt to be part of the show. He wore a simple, dark navy or black jacket, faded jeans, and a dark baseball cap pulled low over his brow, shadowing his face. His hands were shoved deep into his jacket pockets. He wasn't moving, wasn't waving, wasn't interacting with the hayride in any way. He was just watching. And as the wagon rolled past, Sam felt, with a sudden and inexplicable certainty, that the man's gaze was locked not on the wagon in general, but on him, specifically. Their eyes met across the darkness, or at least, Sam felt the weight of the man's hidden gaze, and a primal chill, entirely different from the fun scares of the hayride, shot down his spine. This was not a manufactured thrill, this was a cold, silent alarm bell ringing in his gut. He quickly nudged Ryan, who was on his other side. "Look," Sam whispered, pointing subtly toward the trees. But by the time Ryan turned his head, the tractor had moved on, and the man was swallowed by the darkness behind them. Sam tried to dismiss it, telling himself it was just a worker on a break, maybe a local hunter, or simply his imagination fueled by the spooky atmosphere. But the man's posture, his absolute stillness and intense, focused presence, felt all wrong. It felt like observation with a purpose. Later, back at the roaring bonfire near the lodge, surrounded by the comforting sounds of chatter and the strumming of a guitar, Sam tried to shake off the feeling. He and Ryan were comparing their candy hauls, their faces warmed by the flames. And then he saw him again, across the circle of firelight, standing at the very edge where the warmth gave way to the cool darkness of the surrounding trees. Was the same man. Same jacket. Same cap. Same hands in pockets stance. He wasn't engaging with anyone. He was just standing there, a solitary, silent sentinel in the shadows. And once again, Sam felt the man's attention fixed squarely on him and Ryan. This time, Ryan saw him too. "Who's that?" Ryan asked, his voice casual. "I told you," Sam replied, his own voice tight. "That's the guy from the woods. Maybe he's just someone's dad." Ryan shrugged, already losing interest. "He's not with anyone," Sam insisted, his stomach tightening into a cold knot. "And why would a dad just stand way over there? All by himself, in the dark?" A few minutes later, when Sam gathered the courage to look back, the man was gone. Vanished back into the night. The encounter should have felt concluded, but for Sam, it only deepened the unease. It felt less like a coincidence and more like a check-in. Emboldened by the perceived safety of the crowd, and with a touch of preteen bravura fueled by the holiday, the two boys decided to venture a short way down a wooded path that led from behind their cabins into the forest. It was a path meant for daytime nature walks, marked and well-trodden. "Let's go see if we can see anything spooky for real," Ryan dared, shining his flashlight into the dark mouth of the trail. Sam was hesitant, the image of the man fresh in his mind, but he didn't want to look like a coward. Armed with their flashlights, they left the circle of light and sound and stepped into the quiet of the woods. The change was immediate and profound. Within 50 feet, the festive noises of the resort, the laughter, the music, the crackle of the fire, faded, muffled by the thick blanket of trees until they were completely gone. The only sounds were the crunch of their own sneakers on the gravel path and the rustle of leaves in the faint night breeze. The beam of their flashlights created a small, bobbing island of vision in an ocean of black. They hadn't gone more than 200 feet when they decided to stop near a small clearing where an old, weathered wooden sign was nailed to a tree, reading, "Private property and no trespassing." It felt like the edge of the known world. They started throwing small rocks at the sign, laughing nervously, trying to summon the courage to go just a little farther. That's when they heard the new set of footsteps behind them. They weren't the light, skipping steps of another child. These were heavy, deliberate. The crunch of an adult's weight on gravel. They froze mid-laugh, their blood running cold. Both boys spun around, shining their flashlight beams down the path they had just come from. The lights pierced the darkness, illuminating the empty, winding trail. The footsteps stopped. For a few heartbeats, there was only a profound, crushing silence. It was worse than the footsteps. Then, a calm, male voice spoke from the shadows just beyond their light. "Hey there, boys!" The man from the hayride and the bonfire stepped forward, just enough for his lower half to be caught in the fringe of their flashlight beams. Same dark jacket. Same jeans. The same baseball cap, his face still hidden in its shadow. "What are you two doing out here all by yourselves?" he asked. His tone was deceptively casual, almost friendly, but it carried an underlying chill that made Sam's skin crawl. "You like candy?" He slowly pulled his right hand from his jacket pocket. Pinched between his gloved fingers was a single Reese's peanut butter cup, its orange wrapper stark and bright in the dim light. "I've got a whole bunch more of these back at my cabin," he said, his voice taking on a coaxing, conspiratorial tone. "Come on, I'll give you some. It's not far." Every stranger danger lesson Sam had ever been taught in school screamed in his head. This was the lure. It was textbook. But the most terrifying part, the detail that confirmed this was a predator, and not just a friendly stranger, was his next sentence. "I saw you boys on the hayride earlier. You looked like you were having fun." The bottom dropped out of Sam's stomach. This wasn't a chance meeting. This man had been watching them. He had tracked them. He had waited for this exact moment of isolation. Sam's fight-or-flight response kicked in with a jolt of pure adrenaline. He dropped the rock he was holding and grabbed Ryan's arm so hard his friend yelped. "Run!" Sam whispered, his voice cracking with terror. "Run!" They didn't need telling twice. Both boys spun on their heels and sprinted for their lives back down the path, their flashlights jerking wildly, casting frantic, dancing shadows. For a few terrifying seconds, they could hear the man's heavy footfalls pounding the dirt right behind them as he gave chase. Sam didn't dare look back. He could hear the man's breathing, could almost feel his presence at their backs. The path seemed to have stretched, the journey back an impossible distance. Their lungs burned, and Sam's heart felt like it was going to explode out of his chest. Finally, they saw the glorious, golden lights of the resort cabins through the trees. They burst from the tree line, screaming, "Help! Someone help us!" As they stumbled into the crowd near the bonfire, their faces pale and streaked with tears of fear. By the time alarmed adults and resort staff armed with more powerful flashlights reached the woods, the man was gone. Vanished without a trace. The police were called, reports were filed, but the man was never identified. No one matching his description was a guest. His cabin didn't exist. He was a ghost who had used the festive chaos as his hunting ground. For Sam, the true, lasting terror of that night wasn't just the heart-pounding chase. It was the chilling, slow-burn realization of the man's patience and methodology. He hadn't been a monster leaping from the shadows. He had been a patient, calculating predator who used the perfect camouflage of normalcy: a jacket, a cap, a calm voice, a piece of candy, to hide his sinister intentions. The real horror was the understanding of how easily they could have been led away, and the haunting question of what waited in that cabin that didn't exist. The monster in the woods wasn't wearing a mask, he was wearing a disguise of utter blandness, and that made him all the more terrifying. Our final account plunges us into a different kind of fear, not in a public space or a remote resort, but within the one place we are meant to feel most secure, our own home. This story comes from a man we'll call David. At 29, David was a pragmatic, level-headed individual who worked a steady office job and cherished his quiet, orderly life. His home was his sanctuary, a modest but well-kept two-story house on a street that was family-friendly by day but transformed into a silent, dark lane once the trick-or-treating frenzy ended around 9 p.m. This particular Halloween, David was alone. His girlfriend was out of town visiting family, and he had been content to play the role of the generous, anonymous neighbor, handing out full-sized candy bars to a parade of tiny ghosts, superheroes, and witches. By 9:30, the stream of costumed visitors had dried up completely. He turned off the porch light, a universal signal that the candy was gone, and retreated inside, locking the door with a satisfying, final click. The night was his. He changed into comfortable clothes, poured himself a drink, and settled onto his couch to unwind with a horror movie marathon, the fictional scares on screen providing a safe, controlled thrill. The first sign that his sanctuary was breached was subtle, almost dismissible. At around 10:30, just as the climax of The Conjuring 2 was building, a faint, almost timid knock echoed from his side door, the one that led into his laundry room and garage. He paused the movie, a slight irritation flaring. Latecomers, he thought. Or more likely, teenagers pulling a classic ding-dong ditch. He heaved himself off the couch and padded to the door, peering through the peephole. The narrow field of vision revealed an empty driveway, the street beyond silent and still. A faint breeze rustled the fallen leaves on his lawn. He shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. Kids. He returned to his movie, the incident already fading. But 15 minutes later, a second knock came. This one was different. It wasn't from the side door, it originated from the back of the house, the door that opened onto a small, enclosed wooden deck. A door nobody ever used. A door that, in the darkness of his backyard, felt inherently more private, more vulnerable. A cold finger of unease traced its way down David's spine. This was no longer feeling like a prank. He muted the television, plunging the house into an unnerving silence. He stood perfectly still in the center of his living room, listening with every fiber of his being. And then he heard it, a soft, metallic rattle. It was the sound of the back doorknob being tested. Slowly, cautiously. Not a frantic attempt to get in, but a deliberate, probing motion. Someone was checking to see if it was locked. Fear, cold and sharp, now fully replaced irritation. David's heart began a slow, heavy drum against his ribs. He moved on the balls of his feet, his body low, creeping into the adjoining kitchen. The blinds on the kitchen window were tilted shut, but through the narrow slats, he could see out into the moonlit backyard. His breath caught in his throat. There, crouched in the shadows next to his back door, was a man. He was dressed in dark, nondescript clothing, a black hoodie and jeans. The most chilling detail, however, was the cheap plastic Halloween mask. The kind sold in every drugstore, pushed up on top of his head like a bizarre crown. It was a grotesque, grinning ghoul, a stark contrast to the serious, focused activity below it. In his gloved hand, he held a crowbar. He wasn't skulking or trying to hide. His movements were methodical, practiced. He was assessing the doorframe, looking for a weak point. He knew David was inside. The glow of the television was visible from the street, and he simply did not care. A primal terror, the kind that bypasses the brain and screams directly to the nervous system, seized David. He backed away from the window, his mind racing. He scrambled to the counter where his phone lay, his fingers fumbling as he dialed 911. He whispered his address to the dispatcher, his voice a strained, tight wire. "There's a man at my back door with a crowbar. He's trying to get in. I'm home alone." The dispatcher, a calm female voice, became his tether to sanity. Okay, David, I need you to stay on the line with me. Officers are on their way. Can you get to a room you can lock? A bathroom? A closet? But the idea of being trapped in a small room, of hearing the intruder move through his house, was paralyzing. I'm at the top of the stairs, he whispered, crouching down, making himself small. I can see the back door from here. I don't want to be trapped. He heard the man outside move again. The soft crunch of gravel underfoot. David risked another glance down the stairs. The figure was no longer at the door. A new, more horrifying sound replaced the metallic rattling, the faint, splintering pop of a window screen being pried from its frame. He was at the basement window now, a small, ground-level window that David had always meant to reinforce but never had. He's at the basement window. David hissed into the phone, his body trembling uncontrollably. He's prying off the screen. The dispatcher tried to keep him calm, but the next sound severed his last thread of composure. It was the sharp, unmistakable crack of glass breaking. Not a loud, shattering crash, but a precise, targeted blow. He was in. The sanctity of David's home had been violated. This was no longer a potential burglary, this was a home invasion. And the man's calm, deliberate actions suggested he was not there for the television. He was there for David. The following minutes were a suffocating eternity of pure, unadulterated dread. He clutched the largest kitchen knife he owned, its cool handle offering little comfort. He listened, every muscle taut, for the sound of footsteps on the basement stairs, for the creak of the door leading into the main house. He was a prisoner in his own home, waiting for the door to burst open, and then, a miracle. The distinct crunch of tires on asphalt, followed by the glorious, sweeping glare of headlights painting his living room walls through the blinds. Then, the beautiful, life-affirming flash of red and blue. "He's running!" David exclaimed, a sob of relief catching in his throat. He watched from the window as the man, startled by the sudden arrival of the police, bolted from the side of the house and sprinted across the backyard. He didn't get far. 2 officers tackled him on the damp grass just past David's property line, pinning him down and securing him in handcuffs. The aftermath was a blur of adrenaline and shock. David, still shaking, opened the front door to the police. As they led the intruder past him to a squad car, the man turned his head. His eyes, cold and empty, met David's. In that moment, the mask of normalcy was gone, and David saw the true monster underneath. Then, his gaze dropped to the evidence bag an officer was carrying. Inside was not just a crowbar, but a roll of heavy-duty duct tape and a thick bundle of plastic zip ties. This was not a kit for theft. This was a kit for binding, for silencing, for taking someone. Later, during the follow-up investigation, a detective would somberly confirm David's worst fears. The man was a repeat offender with a long, violent record. In the trunk of his car, parked a few blocks away, police had found a .45 caliber handgun, several sharpened hunting knives, and coils of nylon rope. He wasn't just a burglar, he was a predator who used the chaos of Halloween as his hunting ground. Targeting homes where a single light or a flickering television signaled the lone occupant. The police believed he was connected to other, unsolved disappearances in the region. For David, the psychological fallout was profound. The trauma rewired his nervous system. The sound of a branch tapping a window, the creak of the house settling, an unexpected knock at the door, all could trigger a panic attack. He invested in a comprehensive security system, motion sensor lights, and reinforced doors and windows. But the deepest scar was the loss of his sense of security. His sanctuary had been desecrated. He knew, with a certainty that would haunt him for years, that if the police had been just 5 minutes later, he would have become another statistic, another nameless victim on a cold case file. The monster hadn't been on the television screen that night, he had been in the backyard, his intentions laid bare by the cold, hard steel of a crowbar and the sinister simplicity of a roll of duct tape. 3 different people point 3 different locations. One shared, terrifying holiday. From a coordinated, tactical group stalking a family, to a lone predator lurking in the woods, to a calculated home invader armed for something far worse than theft. These stories force us to confront an uncomfortable truth: evil doesn't take a night off for Halloween. In fact, it sometimes uses the chaos, the costumes, and the comforting darkness as the perfect camouflage for its actions. So, what do you think? Were these events terrifying coincidences, or something more sinister and interconnected? In the first story, who was that tactical-clad group, and what was their true, horrifying objective? In the second, was the man in the woods a lone opportunist, or a scout for something larger? And in David's case, how many others did this predator target before his luck ran out? The evidence, or lack thereof, is now in your hands. This is where I turn it over to you, the true crime community. Your analytical minds, your collective knowledge, and your insightful theories are what make this channel so vital. Share your thoughts, your own experiences, and your deep dives into these mysteries down in the comments below. Let's continue the conversation. And once again, I'm genuinely curious. Let me know where you're joining the investigation from today. If you found this deep dive into the darker side of Halloween compelling, if you believe in shedding light on the stories that linger in the shadows and giving a voice to those who have faced the unthinkable, then you've found your home here. Help us uncover more truths by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and hitting that notification bell. There are countless more mysteries waiting to be explored, and together, we can give them the attention they deserve. Stay aware, stay safe, and thank you for watching.